Hey, you all, this is Jason Truding from So Percussion. This is a Brooklyn Bound podcast, and I'm very pumped about it. This is the second group or second artists that I'm talking to leading up to our March 6th show. It's at 8 o'clock at So Studio in Brooklyn. And this is the first time I'm meeting some of you all. It's wonderful to meet you. We have Sophie Delphis, Brian Ellis, who I know a little bit more, and Aaron Landers on the line. They are from Brooklyn Motion Capture Dance Ensemble, and they'll be doing a set. Welcome, you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be here.
Yes, absolutely. How was my introduction? I've come to asking folks on the line to rate my intro. This is the most terrifying part of this conversation, is trying to do some introduction. So
For sure. Yeah. I
you're
mean,
feeling okay about it?
well, I felt personally
Okay.
very well
You
represented.
you felt good. I even asked you how to say your last name, and then I kind of stumbled. I'm not a radio personality or a Zoom personality. Well, I'm very, very happy that you all are chatting with me for this time. And I want to hear about what you're doing on this show. But if it's cool, Brian, since I know you were a socio alum, which is so cool, and you were doing some of this motion capture dance work at our Zoom soci, which was pretty cool. We're gonna go around to all three of you, but why don't you give us just like from small Brian to medium Brian to large Brian to full grown Brian. What was your way into this world? And I guess, as a musician and as a dancer and movement artist person.
Yeah. So the identity that I'm kind of in the groove of right now, is kind of one of creative coding, I've found. Um, and creative coding kind of specifically around music and interaction design sort of stuff. And the kind of old joke is that I on my fifth birthday, I was given a classical guitar and an introduction to HTML handbook.
Oh, that makes
And
for
now we're here.
such a great seed conversation piece for this moment. You have the perfect answer, in fact. It was your fifth birthday.
Yeah, and so was playing classical guitar kind of since then. It's funny. So it was there was a like true baby Brian. There was this electric guitar toy that I just loved and would not put down, that just plays like three songs based off of which button you're pushing.
Awesome.
My parents saw that and they were like, musician, guitar. We're not having any electric guitar in the house. Let's go try this classical thing.
Nice.
And me being like, a 5-year-old, didn't know the difference. And so, it was like maybe 10 or 15 years later, I was like, wait, this isn't that. Not really
I have to
questioning it
cross
too
my
much.
legs, right? Did you have one of those? One of the cross your
I,
legs?
I I had one of the little footstools that you sit up on, and yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Um, yeah, so did that, and then kind of played guitar all through high school. When I got to college, I started taking it all the music stuff a lot more seriously. Started just so I went into college as a computer science major, and just started like sitting in on all of the music classes that I could, just like the composition ones. And then in sophomore year, I started being like, okay, like let's start pretending we're a music major and taking all the theory and ear training and sight singing stuff, while I audition, so that way hopefully they let me in and be like, look, I'm doing it. Um, so I kind of
Where were you?
went through
Where
that.
is this? Is it Texas? Is it Austin, Texas, or no?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. University of Texas.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, UT. And so while I was there, learned, Max MSP, and did like the whole kind of like electronic music route, from like Russell Pinkston and everything. And then I joked that like going into like my super senior year, I was gonna write a big thesis. Um, and the thing is, like, I feel like I went into that year like a person who had a lot of skills and like knew how to play music and knew how to do Max and knew how to do all the coding stuff. And I like came out of that year like a musician, right? Like, I was really fortunate to get to work with Nina Young and Bora Yoon came through and was kind of a really big influence on a lot of my musical activities and stuff. And then ended up writing this thesis, which was about how uh, like interaction of music technology, right? So like, how do you make things interactive? How do you get the audience involved? How do you give performers more agency? How do you like bring other people into this like bigger umbrella of like capital C composer?
Mm.
And that kind of kicked off all of the work that kind of turned into all of this fun stuff that we're doing here, and we'll be doing on
Cool.
March 6th. That with a couple of points along the way, the project that I did with Soci was kind of the first time that I was like, all right, let's like use some of these like webcam AI tools to like do pose recognition and then feed that into like processing of live musicians. And so that was kind of like a really cool high point. And then there were a couple of other times where I was writing pieces for musicians, and a lot of those works were very interesting and very like cool and conceptual. But I found like that time and time again, I was like asking musicians, they're so well trained to like move the little fingers so fast, right? And to like do all the things, and then like asking for some of these like bigger motions and things. Like it was very clear, it's like there's something that they trained and got PhDs in, and there's something that they can also do, right? And so the observation was like, okay, so about a year ago I was like, okay, so we need to like actually double down and work with dancers and folks who are really trained in this, and start bringing other expertise into this to make it broader and more interesting and more engaging, and really expertise that I do not have. And so that's kind of when I found Erin and started working with her, and we kind of that kind of birthed into the ensemble that we now have and that we're working with. Yeah.
Erin, I can see you play your story from your fifth grade or fifth birthday is something about a half guitar. I'm ready for it. I can see it back there. You're
No.
you didn't have the whole one, but you got the half one. So no, something like
No,
that.
actually, the half guitar. My husband is a guitar player, and he was teaching in some program where they were supplying him with some very poor quality instruments that broke easily, and this one was completely broken. It was going to cost way more to fix it than to just buy a new one. So it became a planter. There's no plant in it at the moment.
I love it. Are there CDs on top of it? Are there books?
No, those are like little like cards, but just like pictures.
Love it.
Anyway, so on the wall. So yes, that explains the half guitar. Yeah. I actually, my background is in dance mostly, which I arrived at very much through music. My parents are both musicians. And so the short version is like through them and their musical practices and meeting their friends, dance just very much became part of my life. My dad plays a lot of Shona music from Zimbabwe and has deeply studied in that tradition. And so when I started,
Shona? Is Shona the instrument or is it the style?
No, it's like the culture.
Yeah.
That it comes out
Awesome.
of. And so and language. And so hanging around with a lot of the musicians he was playing with, his friend Julia was, I think I was very, very young, like this is pre-kindergarten. So I think his friend Julia was in the process of immigrating to the States. Oh, and I'm from Oakland, California, so that's where all of this was happening. Really? And she's a dancer and brought me in at lots of family gatherings and was always showing me different steps I could do. And so I was doing that just very organically at gatherings and stuff. And then when I got to kindergarten, I remember on the first day, this one other kid being like, I do classical ballet. And I was like, whoa, classical ballet. I need to do that. And funnily enough, my mother, who has a degree in classical piano, she had been a ballet accompanist for a long time in New York. And so she called her friends and asked, do you know any ballet teachers out in California that I could send my daughter to? And so it was very much through both of my parents and their musical interests that I ended up studying a really broad swath of dance practices, and both doing like ballet and modern and that sort of very classical track. And also, my parents love to play lots of different folk music. And so learning about that and learning dances from Bulgaria and Irish dance and just like all of that as well was so much a part of my upbringing.
Was this before like getting, did you go to school for dance, or what was your path after?
Yeah. So that was all I'm thinking about, like, childhood and teenage times in Oakland, California. I went to San Francisco School of the Arts for high school, really starting to focus on dance and concert dance specifically. And then I went on to study at SUNY Purchase, both dance performance and composition.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that's how that all kind of happened. And then, collaborations with musicians were still very much a part of my life. I was working a lot with my husband started a group called Echo Ensemble that was all musicians and dancers making improvised installation works together. And so I was doing a lot of work with that. And then basically I ended up getting connected to a friend, Andrew Yoon, who's also like a composer, creative coder, and getting really excited about one of the things that he created, the spectrophone, and which makes sound in reaction to colors. And so we worked together in creating a piece that had these like beautiful, colorful costumes painted by Lara Lewison, and we were dancing around, and that was just such a cool project and process. So anyway, a mutual friend of Andrew's and Brian's reached out to me and was like, hey, so since you're sort of doing this like dance with coding and music thing, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that, but I guess that's what I'm doing now. Since you're doing that, like, how would you feel about being connected to another friend of mine who wants to do something similar? So that's, Brian and I had a chat and we were like, okay, great, let's keep doing this. Let's figure this out.
I love when something becomes a thing. Like I've heard creative coding more in this conversation, which is twice, and I'm learning. Of course, that's a thing. When you said it, I knew exactly what it was, but I was like, oh. And now the idea that creative coding with dance, it's a genre. This is amazing. And I imagine, Sophie, when you were 5, your goal in life was to be a creative coder dancer. And your parents gave you a book on creative coding dance, and the rest is history.
I do actually come from a tech background.
Yes.
I never did anything in tech, but actually I did know how to code and program when I was a tween. But I am a singer. I'm a classical singer.
Amazing.
That is my usual gig. I am a performer kind of as a pretext to communicate, I think, and be seen. And I work very, very much with words most of the time. I don't do any sort of composition, but I write a fair amount. I'm currently also doing a doctorate at the Graduate Center CUNY.
Cool.
So I really like the kind of academic side of things, but also the performance side of things. And as a singer, really with words. But I have ballet training. I did ballet until I was 18, basically, with a very delightful, diminutive nonagenarian Russian lady who was like, who looked like she was in her late 80s and
I
90s.
love
It was just like,
delightfully diminutive. I love all of those descriptors. My partner's about to go on a tour of Ireland and loves, as she has many friends, whatever. She's been reading a lot. She's just like, Irish folks have just the best ways of describing people. And we were talking through some of those. And Sophie, you just nailed it. You just took it to another level. That was a wonderful descriptor. I can imagine
like
this teacher.
true Baba Yaga energy, really. And kind of unpleasant to me for like 2 years, trying to convince me that I probably didn't want to dance. Because I started, I think when I was 11 or 12, I didn't want to become a dancer,
Yeah.
but I was actually like quite serious about just my training for those years. And eventually I decided I was going to become a musician. That's what I went to school for. That's what I do. I never really discussed
Yeah. When did you discover very young that you wanted to sing, or what was your process there?
I decided to go into conservatory mindset because it seemed like the hardest thing for me to do, like the least obvious thing for me to do. I come from a very academic background. Another little piece of the puzzle is that I'm French originally, and when I found out that in the American university system you were allowed to just change things, sometimes you were allowed to start your life over, I really ran with that. And so I decided, oh, no, it's okay. I'll just do this thing. It seems like the hardest thing possible. And if a good conservatory takes me, it means that I must be worthy enough. And if they don't, then I shall do something else, anything else. It's fine. This is the American way. And so I kind of just didn't fail for a while and never really felt great about being a musician. I've always loved music and I loved performing. But as I said, I kind of was always just a pretext. And I just never really quit because I didn't fail enough to quit. And then recently I actually started really liking it and became an adult music maker who felt empowered and, but it took a little while.
That sentence was gonna go one of two ways. I was like, and recently I started to fail. Like, it was like, no, recently these great things. But Sophie, how cool is that though? The idea that singing is that communication is a pretext to singing, like that feels like that's pretty core to what artists do. So it feels like actually like maybe you've had it figured out a lot longer than like it feels like that's a pretty healthy way in.
Yeah, and that's actually why I finally feel good, I think, about being a musician, is I forgot the the aspect of why I wanted to perform for a long time, which is very normal. You're in a very conservatory setting and studio system, and you have to do this, and you have to be mentored in this way, and you're nothing until somebody tells you that you're good enough, and your technique needs to be absolutely perfect. I'm a classical singer, so it's just constantly being told that I need to look a certain way and be a certain way and think a certain way. And then, it's not super great for any part of your emotional landscape.
Yeah. And your instrument is but that's very connected. So do you say BMCDE or do you say Brooklyn Motion Capture Dance Ensemble?
What do we say? I don't know.
I generally say either Brooklyn Motion Capture, or I've also recently started saying Bomoko, which just in casual conversation, but I think Brooklyn Motion Capture is kind of what I'm generally sticking with.
Brooklyn. Well, awesome. So it feels like in a great way, the project is pretty new. You don't have a way that you always talk about it. Is it a fixed, are the three of you all Brooklyn Motion Capture, or is it a flexible? Tell me about the project. And actually, I guess I know how Brian and Aaron, you all met. Then where did Sophie come from? Sophie, how are you a part of this crew? Where did you?
I think I'm correct in this story, but Brian, you can correct me. You saw me, Brian, perform with New Chamber Ballet, right? And that's kind of what first put the bug in your ear. Is that the idea? So I was
I think
performing with New Chamber Ballet, singing and dancing, and I think I met you in the
and
audience.
then I think saw you at an infrasound concert and was like, okay, so you are truly
Yeah, I'm
like
like
plugged
going
into
to,
all
yeah.
Nice.
all the same things, and you're very capable in all the different disciplines. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I'm sorry, Jason, was there a question you asked
Yeah,
before that one?
it's a really good
Well,
question. Was there a
Right,
question at the end of my rambling? But yeah, tell me about the group. What is the group fixed? Is the group flexible? Is the group tell me about the group.
it's pretty flexible, but we have a couple of core people who are involved in it. Aaron obviously is our movement director and is very critical to all of the things that happen. Sophie and Zachary are both our core ensemble members, and so Zachary is unfortunately out of town and is not able to join us for the March 6th show. And so as core members, very involved in like the planning process and ideations and all the future aspirations that we have. And then we also bring in other dancers as we need to kind of fill out the ranks for some of the bigger things that we try to do. And so yeah, so I guess short answer is flexible.
Yeah. Flexible but core.
cast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I want to hear about specifically what's going to happen at the Brooklyn Bound show. But is there anything else like before we get specifics in your broader artistic life as an ensemble? Is there any context to bring to I can ask that of anybody. Aaron's looking up, Sophie's looking away, Brian's.
Aaron, do you want to take a crack at that?
But yeah, so Aaron, you lead up the movement portion of the group. Is that kind of?
Yeah. So basically, we decided on the title for now of movement director because what I'm doing here sometimes is more on the choreographing end of the spectrum, sometimes is more on the directing and improvisation end of the spectrum, giving prompts and ideas and qualities to work with. But also I am involved with Brian on sort of the planning of like, okay, what are we doing? Preparing for rehearsals and things like that. Yeah. Sorry, but there was a question before that, and I feel like I missed it.
Was there? I feel like I'm in a wonderful way. It's awesome to hear the three of your different backgrounds, and it feels to me that actually like shows. It feels like that's a lot of the core of the group in some way. Like actually the idea that I mean, Brian, meeting you through Soci, I think, right, my first context was like knowing that you played guitar and you were a performer, but like you came to Soci as a composer. But even the idea that we have kind of like creative coder, dancer, musician, and it seems though that everybody does a little bit of everything as well. And on this show, I know you're playing a piece by another composer, percussionist in our Soci alum scene, Christian De Leon. Yeah. So how does the process work? And maybe you each of you could, I don't know, so Sophie, why don't we start with you? You could lead us to the show, but do you oftentimes, are you taking a piece of music and then setting movement onto it, or how does it work? And maybe with Christian's piece, why don't we start there?
Well, in general, there was a big kind of incubation period of our meeting weekly or quasi-weekly to really play with the tech. And that was the kind of foundational aspect was, I mean, it's going to be kind of stupid to say, but really like motion capture, tech, and movement. And that is really very foundational, that the music is really coming from motion. It's not in terms of compositions, it has depended on the different pieces that we've done and the different composers, and also kind of the different texts being used for the different pieces. So some of them have been more like, this is a composition and it's going to be performed in a certain way. But the common uniting factor is that motion is actually the playing principle for the compositions. So it's not, and which is partially why Erin is not calling herself just a choreographer or something like this, even though she's definitely choreographing and movement directing, and kind of some of it is because it's improvisational from all of the movers, but also because it's not a matter of, okay, here's a piece of music and it lasts X minutes long, and therefore we need to fill it with this kind of choreography. Brian mentioned that musicians are good at moving the little fingers. So there's always a movement component to making sound, of course, but now we're just blowing it up so that it's the full human body and kind of interconnectedness within space that makes the music. So all of the planning of specific pieces kind of has that foundational element to it. And when we're playing around with different composers' visions or what a specific tech or technique is or is not able to do, there is really very much like, okay, what can we do with our limbs, our bodies, our connections between different people, as you'll see in one of the pieces, especially that we're doing on the 6th, that makes sound.
And is it fair to think, I mean, Erin, when you said movement director, or Brian, when you described Erin as movement director, I mean, to me, that reads really clearly. Most of the dancers or choreographers that I would work with have kind of thought about whether it's pedestrian movement stuff, like we work with Susan Marshall quite a bit, or like the idea of talking about dance as movement makes a lot of sense. And then in the same way, talking about music as sound, does it almost feel like you're dealing with movement and sound more than you're dealing with dance and music? Is that a fair?
Sure. It really depends on the piece, but I think yes, because the movement has a functional aspect to it in a way that it wouldn't normally, right? Because we are actually triggering the sound, and if the movement doesn't happen a certain way, the sound doesn't happen, or it happens differently, or so there is a little bit more of like this sense that, oh, okay, we're trying to hit this moment in this particular way. That's a little bit more like functional and functionally driven. Yeah.
The one thing that I kind of think I would add to this is a lot of, so not across the board, but with a lot of the composers who I reached out to and I've kind of commissioned to be a part of making music for this group. In the initial kind of like sussing out what the roles are kind of going to be, a lot of the way I kind of describe it is, chatting with the composers, I'm like, you're going to be doing some composing, but really a lot of what you're doing is like instrument building, right? It's like coming up with the ideas, the structures, the situations for interesting musical and movement things to happen, right? And then like setting up this infrastructure for Erin to be able to come in and help facilitate from like a movement direction. Okay, how do all of these things kind of unfold? And then because a lot of it is pretty improvisatory, okay, then like the individual performers, how do they like within that like those kind of combined infrastructures fill up that individual space? I think this is actually really clear on Christian's piece that we're going to be doing, where it's a very like contact and touch based piece, and the instrument very much like becomes the two bodies and the conductivity and all the ways that the speaker systems, and like it's a very holistic thing, and like the first moment of contact is just like this really magical moment, like activating the instrument into being in a pretty cool way. So that's one thing that I'm really excited about for
well, and I say quickly, but it's a big question because I want to ask about the other pieces. But what do you think about this the way of framing movement and dance versus sound and music. How do you feel about that coming from the, maybe if you're coming from the sound side of things or the music side of things?
Yeah, you know, I try not to think about it too much. I think is actually my answer. You know, I over the pandemic, I developed a practice of no input mixing, which is like the noisiest, most sound oriented, you know, practice there is.
Wait, what? No input mixing?
I it's where you take a like a mixer and you take the outputs and you plug them into the inputs and then you
Mhm.
fiddle with like the levels and the
Cool, cool,
dials
cool,
and
cool,
stuff.
cool.
Make
Okay. Yeah.
um
Cool, cool, cool. Yeah.
and you know, to me, like sound and music are kind of one and the same
Yeah.
in that it is just like organization of how we hear the world. And yeah, so I, you know,
Awesome. No, I was
yeah.
honestly, I was hoping I was leading you that way. I mean, it just brings up the question of like, what is dance and what is music, right? And I think, I don't know, for me, I guess the working definition maybe is just organized sound is music and organized movement is dance. And to me, the organization is just like, if you decide to listen to it that way, it is, or you decide to see it that way, it is. But it's fun. I like, for a long time, I didn't worry about those questions anymore. And I've actually been doing more teaching now, and then those questions come up again, and they're kind of annoying, but kind of fun. I don't know.
With us, the maybe even more devilish, is it this or is it that? It's not so much is it sound or is it music, is it movement or is it dance? If I got all of the
I think
quadrants.
yeah.
Is it movement or is it sound? With us, actually, it's not so much is this dance or is it just motion? Is it, you know, a soundscape or is it a piece of music? Like that already, it's a blurry thing. What we're doing, actually, it's an even greater blurring, is that are we making motion or are we making sound? Because we're making both.
That's interesting. Yeah. It's true. That's interesting. As a music group that plays with dancers, it's impossible, and we feel good about it when it happens for the most part, but it's very hard to play with dancers and it not be dance. Like, or at least not be thought of that way from the audience, right? Like it's impossible not to look. And actually there's going to be another dancer on the evening. And this tap dancer that we work with at Princeton, Michael Love, who's very cool. And there's going to be little bits of two pieces that we've been making with him in two different ways. And it's interesting because he makes a lot of sound. So he's very much a musician in that moment, but it's also just impossible not to be looking at it. You know, it's like so cool to see. So yeah, we've not struggled with that, but when a dancer's on stage, it's hard for it not to be dance. And that's a really cool perspective. So Sophie, that it's possible maybe to take in this set and to be actively thinking about what is this, or what's which is supporting which, maybe, as that's part of the question. So Christian's piece, I take it as, it sounded like, is a duet. Is that right? And so different pieces on the evening are different. Is there a trio?
Yes.
There is a trio. I'm curious, maybe Aaron, do you want to talk about your solo first?
Yeah. So we have solo
Sure.
duo trio?
Yes, we do. We have all three of them. Yeah, so I'll be doing a solo that was made collaboratively with a different Zachary, Zach Ritter. So basically, I don't know, Brian, do you want me to say anything about how that like came together? Okay. So basically, we had a chat about what we wanted to do. And after talking about some ideas, Zach sent me just a little track of music that he made, electronic, and asked me to make some recordings of myself playing accordion along with it, which is something else I slightly do secretly, not so secretly now. So I made some little simple recordings, and then he took the two of them and processed them in all kinds of ways that I don't really know how to speak about. But it becomes this sort of motion capture landscape. We're using a webcam, and it's creating this like very spatial atmosphere that I'm dancing through. And from within, it's very improvised, this one. And from within, for me, it's really about that coming together of sound and space, and sort of leaning into listening to the ways that sound is creating space. Yeah, that's what it is.
How cool. And have you done the solo before? Is this something that's been in the repertoire, and this is a...
Yeah. So we first showed it at our, we did a show in December. So yeah, it'll be...
I know about
this
this show, Brian, because it was honestly on my calendar. I want to take a screenshot of it. But kids are awesome. And also December kids activities and interesting things happening in New York don't always come together. So I'm so happy. Yeah, Sophie's not buying it. I'm so happy that I get to see this piece in Brooklyn. So Sophie, are you involved in a trio? Are all three of you involved in the trio?
Yes.
And what's the trio?
That is a kind of the permutations of personnel for that is an ever-changing thing depending on space and who we've got.
Cool.
We did this also in December with 4 people. The fourth kind of core member, first Zachary mentioned, and another dancer who was joining us for that show. And Brian, you didn't solo. No, you didn't solo in that. Brian joined in as the 4th member when we did it beginning of this month. What months are?
Yeah,
I don't know.
constructs.
But anyway, recently, and now you're
in
Leo member. But this is also kind of a constantly evolving thing because it involves anybody who's around.
Awesome. Oh, yes.
So it's a
Awesome.
trio plus.
So it involves anybody who's at the show, can and will be involved. Awesome. And Brian, I know you were telling me a little bit about this when I saw you the other day. It can involve other folks contributing sounds ahead of time at the moment, I take it.
It's a really fun piece that I really enjoy putting on. The premise of it is it's meant to be extremely open in that, like, sonically there's like a pretty simple phrase that repeats, and that is mirrored with a pretty simple movement phrase that repeats, and as it develops it gets more complex and more interesting, and then occasionally someone new comes in and we reset back to kind of the simplest iteration of it. And one of the things that we would love to do is other performers who we share the stage with, both musically and movement wise, inviting them to join and take part. And so for movers, there is a very clear moment where the audience is invited to join us, and for musicians, we can record a simple thing ahead of time and then have that folded in as part of the electronics and the soundscapes that kind of unfold. And cool. So it's really like this big collaborative process of like bringing everybody in, and it's a lot of fun.
I love the way you describe it. We've towards the music of mine where when we'll play with students at different spots oftentimes, or different musicians in different towns. And usually we discover something new about the piece when you do it with somebody new, and then you end up taking that idea to the next place you go. And it's not so much that it's recorded, but it's like, oh, we did that cool thing in Michigan, let's do it here, kind of thing. And the way you described that, Brian, when I saw you the other day at a Brooklyn Bound, was like kind of like, people keep folding things in, and then you take that to the next performance and you keep adding. And I just love that concept. It's really, yeah, it's a very beautiful idea. I'm looking forward to that one. Well, this is so fun to chat, and each of you have so different and awesome things to contribute. I have some other questions that we usually end on, and we'll see if we can talk about both of them, or maybe just you're so thorough and in depth we can talk about one, because we got three folks. But I think I mentioned to you, Brian, this podcast mostly came online, during the pandemic, and so it was kind of awesome and invigorating to talk to other artists, but also like super intense because like I was saying this talking to Michael Love on this same interview podcast vibe the other day, which is like I realized last week I haven't finished a piece of music, like written a new piece of music in like 3 years or whatever. It just like became not a part of my practice. It was like I need to be in a room with people to make things. So I was making a ton of old things of mine, but I wasn't making new things until, so like the pandemic just kind of like changed my way of working as an artist. And then in obvious ways, you start to question like, what is my role as an artist? What should it be? And as I said to Michael the other day, like every time I had one of these conversations, there'd be something else to add to that. Right. So the biggest one that has framed, I think, a lot of our organization's conversations was the George Floyd's murder, really becoming a mirror for folks who look like me and for our scene to talk about like, okay, why does our scene look the way it does, and what do we need to do about that? And then I feel like every month there was another thing to add to that, politics and just anything. We could list them all, right? But we don't have to. And you don't have to take on every one of these ideas. But over the last 3 years, has there been a moment that you've decided to change your practice, or have you wanted to change your practice, or have the last 3 years been about kind of discovering something that's already been in your practice and kind of maybe doubling down on that? Or how has this very intense time, I guess this is the question, maybe, how has this very intense time kind of ask questions of you as an artist? Very small softball. Who wants to softball
Yeah,
first?
no problem. Let's go.
Brian, you're unmuted. Like the first
Yeah.
question is like, Brian, take me from being small to now, like a very small question, and now this question is very, very expansive as well.
Yeah. I recognize that I had an extremely abnormal pandemic. I was incredibly fortunate and well placed and well prepared, that when the world kind of went online, um, I had a fledgling artistic practice of web-based creative coding that suddenly was like the hottest shit that everybody wanted to do and be a part of, which was extremely like helpful for me personally to be able to just like fully lean into that, get my chops like super up level them in that capacity, and really just make a lot of space for me to explore. Right before the pandemic, like the kind of summer before, I'd moved to California for work, and was kind of like in the process of meeting people, and like had kind of like not actually met that many people yet. And it was this in for me this like extremely um like large opportunity of like, oh well, like you just moved to a place that you don't quite have a community yet, but all your friends from back home are now doing Zoom concerts every weekend, and all the people from like all the communities you want to be a part of are also like online on Facebook groups and doing all this stuff. And so I was extremely privileged to be able to like kind of do a lot with that. And I I recognize that that is like completely like a world apart from I think everybody else's pandemic experience. And so just like kind of like reckoning with that and being like, okay, so like I came out of it, you know, like a, with a ton more collaborations and like interactions, and I did a lot of things like remotely and like, you know, a lot. I mean, like SOCI, like that was kind of like one of the big things that I was like, I am able, like I would not be able to do this if this was an in-person thing, because like I wouldn't be able to take off from work for long enough to make it happen and stuff. And so just like all of those opportunities going online was absolutely huge for me. And it really kind of gave me a lot of opportunity that I would not have had otherwise.
Well, I think it's such a, I mean, at a moment that we were all doing that, but it didn't feel so connective. I feel like it's very cool that your practice is more connect. I mean, it's more than just sitting. I mean, we sat on Zoom and tried to play Pauline Oliveros also, and it's just like a kind of hilariously terrible process. I mean, whatever. It was important at that moment, but like your practice is more in depth and more connective than that. So I feel like that's such a beautiful way to use this crazy moment.
And it was really I think the biggest thing was like, it was kind of the push that I needed to be like, hey, you can do more here. You can do more to bring these people together, to bring other folks involved, to write music that like gets other, you know, other musicians who don't have other things they can do right now, to get them, you know, involved into the fold, like to bring dancers, like, you know, the first dance SOCI collaboration, right, was like, you know, to bring those folks in who like, you know, haven't had a dance gig in, you know, months,
Yeah.
and like give them something to, you know, it really gave me like, I felt like I was like a man on a mission with like, you know, it's like I have the toolbox, like let's go build some things. Yeah,
I
build
love
some
that.
connection.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that, Brian. That's very, very cool.
Someone else want to go?
I think that is kind of an underlying methodology for this ensemble. The people that you're bringing together are coming from extremely diverse and usually kind of not just diverse but varied backgrounds, as you may have noticed based on the representation of the three of us. Like really obviously connected in some ways in our disciplines, but also really coming from quite different areas. And that's the case with everybody else that we've danced with and whose music or works we have danced for. And I think that that kind of like being alone and wanting to connect to a bunch of people method is kind of how we're collecting people experiences and even just textures in this ensemble.
Hmm.
So it's not, I'm
No,
adding.
very cool.
I said.
And Brian and Sophie have spoken very eloquently about the ensemble, at least, or the practice. Is there anything to add? Or, you know what? Can you, usually our last question is a little quicker and pithier. And since we do have to wrap up, maybe you could take us out on what I always say in this moment is that our group, you know, when you're doing this thing for a long time, you end up with these stories that become a kind of connective tissue for a group. You know, whatever. So's been doing this for 20 years or something, and we have all the moments of like, oh, on this tour, this crazy thing happened, and on this concert, this crazy thing happened. And sometimes they're really awesome, but oftentimes they're hilariously sad. You know, the instrument that, you know, the guitar that breaks in half while you were playing your big solo, you know, whatever. Is there, either for yourself or for the group, is there, I mean, you deal with technology, like some crazy shit had to happen somewhere, you know? Maybe you can share that one on our way out.
I feel like Brian and Sophie are maybe laughing about the same moment as I am, probably. I mean, we've had a lot of really, really great ones and really, really magical moments of like, it works, like, what? I never thought it would work. But the funny one is very recent. And I'm sure when I tell this, someone listening is going to be like, why did you do that? That was such a bad idea. So I am hilariously a little bit like, how do you say, electronics make me a little bit nervous.
Understood.
Like, you know, electricity, sockets, things like that. I don't know. I'm a little squeamish, I guess. Anyway, so we've been playing around with this Playtronica, and you know, it's all touch based, and it's using the connectivity of your skin, and so, you know, I've been pretty cool with it. It's been very nice. But we did do a thing the other day where we tried to do it through water, and it was working really well. Actually, everything went really well until we wanted to make a container for the water. And we didn't have a container for the water. So we makeshift created one out of foil, and, you know, got shocked. And I
like hair.
No, it really wasn't that bad, but it, you know, it was enough.
Tiny,
It was tiny, but we certainly felt it, both me and Sophie. And, you know, that's what happens sometime. Really glad, though, that happened. We didn't die, no lasting effects. And, you know, maybe I can just kind of let that one.
Oh my gosh, that's so
like,
great.
Yeah, okay.
I feel like compared to if I'm talking to like a string quartet or something, like we have crazy stories because we play on weird things. But this is just so great because we don't have any. It's not so life and death. The electricity and the water. We don't go near electricity and water. You guys.
Yeah, just don't
like
put it.
minor kerfuffle is usually like, oh yeah, and then my bow like flew
There you
out
go.
of the
Exactly.
audience, and
Yeah.
ours was we low-key electrocuted ourselves.
Probably no lasting effects. Most likely no lasting effects. Should
Yeah, I'm gonna go with not. Yeah, so water and aluminum foil and Playtronica all together, not a good call, but one at a time, water and aluminum foil, just fine.
Good. Oh, amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that one, Erin. That's a great way to end this wonderful conversation. It's so nice to officially, even though it's just in 2D, I'll meet you in 3D soon, Erin and Sophie. It's always nice to talk to you, Brian. Y'all are so thoughtful and eloquent about your practice. I cannot wait to see it live. It is March 6th. It's at 8 o'clock. Paul Pinto, who I'm about to talk to this afternoon, will be doing a solo set, singing, yeah, and so we'll be doing a little with this tap dancer Michael Love, who's amazing. So I can't wait for you all to meet. See you then. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good one.